Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the mysterious and bizarre world of the Egyptian pharaohs. Picture it now, grand, golden palaces, the scent of incense floating in the air, and towering pyramids looming over a vast, endless desert. The pharaohs were the gods of ancient Egypt, wielding power beyond anything we can truly fathom. But their lives? Well, they were anything but ordinary. Now, you probably won't survive this mentally. You'll be questioning everything you know about kings and queens, and some of it might even make your stomach churn. But hey, that's why we're here, right? To explore the weird, the wondrous, and the downright odd. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's start by taking a look at the pharaohs themselves. They weren't just powerful rulers. They were seen as living gods, divine beings on earth who commanded respect, fear, and absolute loyalty. A pharaoh was the intermediary between the gods and the people, believed to have been chosen by the gods to lead Egypt to greatness. This divine status wasn't just a title. It shaped every moment of their existence, from the way they ruled to the way they lived, ate, and even died. Historians still argue whether the divine status of pharaohs was purely a political move, meant to maintain control, or if the people truly believed their rulers had supernatural power. Regardless of the debates, one thing is clear: to be a pharaoh meant more than simply wearing a crown and ruling a kingdom. You had to live and act in a way that reinforced your godly nature. Imagine this: each pharaoh's daily life was a series of rituals designed to maintain their divine connection with the gods. From morning to night, they would perform offerings, make prayers, and preside over ceremonies, ensuring their place in the cosmic order. To them, their power wasn't just political, it was cosmic. This constant connection to the divine made the pharaoh's life one of both immense privilege and incredible pressure. No wonder their lives were often filled with a strange sense of detachment from the world around them. As we continue our journey through the mysterious lives of the pharaohs, let's take a closer look at the tombs that were built for them. But not just any tomb. These were grand, otherworldly monuments meant to ensure their immortality. Imagine stepping into a tomb so massive that it could house everything a pharaoh might need for the afterlife. Treasures, furniture, food, even pets. These tombs weren't just places of burial. They were gateways to eternity. Historians still argue whether these extravagant tombs were a sign of reverence for the pharaohs, or if they were a way to consolidate power and display wealth. Regardless, the sheer scale and complexity of these tombs were nothing short of breathtaking. The most famous, of course, are the pyramids, gigantic, mysterious structures that still baffle scholars today. They were designed with precise mathematical calculations and religious symbolism, meant to connect the pharaoh to the gods and the stars. And at the heart of these pyramids, the pharaoh's burial chamber was filled with gold, jewels, and the pharaoh's most prized possessions. But tombs weren't just about wealth. They were also about preparation for the afterlife. Egyptian beliefs held that the soul would need everything it had in life to survive the journey through the underworld. So, the tombs were stocked with food, clothing, weapons, and even models of servants who could continue to serve their master in the next life. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a belief in the continuity of life after death. In fact, some tombs had elaborate rooms that were never meant to be seen by anyone. Sealed off, hidden from prying eyes, designed solely to preserve the pharaoh's journey into eternity. It's hard to imagine how much effort went into creating these massive tombs, and yet the pharaohs were not just buried in solitary confinement. They were surrounded by rituals designed to ensure their safe passage through the afterlife. Every step of the process, from the mummification to the sealing of the tomb, was a carefully choreographed performance, one meant to help the pharaoh navigate the treacherous journey that lay ahead. And if you think all this sounds like something out of a legend, well, it is. But it was also real, a carefully crafted reality for the pharaohs who believed that death was not the end, but a new beginning. Now, let's take a step deeper into the pharaohs' lives, into their daily routines. A pharaoh's day wasn't like the ones you or I might experience. No morning coffee or casual meetings with a team. For the pharaoh, every single moment was a blend of divine duties and strategic decisions, all centered around maintaining their godly image and overseeing a vast kingdom. In fact, their daily life could only be described as a non-stop series of rituals, ceremonies, and affairs of state. Historians still argue whether these rituals were truly something the pharaohs believed in or if they were simply symbolic gestures to maintain control over their people. One thing that is certain is that the pharaohs were never off duty. From dawn until nightfall, they had a relentless schedule filled with religious offerings to the gods, strategic meetings with advisors, and public appearances meant to show their power and divine connection. Every action, from how they dressed to how they spoke, was a statement of their godlike status. Picture this. Every morning, the pharaoh would begin their day with a prayer to the sun god, Ra, to ensure that the sun would rise again. They would then receive visitors, high-ranking officials, priests, and sometimes foreign diplomats, always in a grand, ceremonial way. These meetings weren't just about diplomacy. They were performances, rituals that reinforced the pharaoh's role as the divine ruler of Egypt. In between these public displays, there would also be private rituals, where the pharaoh would make offerings to the gods in their personal temples, always maintaining their spiritual connection. But even amidst all the grandeur, the pharaohs were still human. They had to eat, sleep, and deal with the pressures of ruling a kingdom that stretched across the Nile. Their daily meals were carefully prepared, often involving exotic foods and delicate preparations, and their sleeping arrangements were luxurious beyond anything most people could ever imagine. However, even their sleep wasn't simply rest. It was also a time for them to commune with the gods, often through dreams or visions that were interpreted by royal priests. The pharaoh's life was a delicate balance between the divine and the mundane, a continuous performance designed to reinforce their position as both god and king. Their every move was a part of an ongoing narrative meant to solidify their place in history and their status as an immortal figure. As we step deeper into the royal world of the pharaohs, we can't ignore the influence of the women behind the throne. While the pharaohs were revered as gods, their lives were often shaped and guided by the powerful women around them. These women weren't just wives or consorts. They were political players, warriors, and sometimes the true power behind the crown. The role of women in the Egyptian court was more complex than we might think, and their influence shaped the very course of Egyptian history. Historians still argue whether the pharaoh's wives held true political power or whether they were more symbolic figures, meant to reinforce the king's divine rule. Either way, many of these women were incredibly powerful in their own right. Take for example Queen Hatshepsut. She didn't just sit idly by while her husband ruled. She took the throne for herself, becoming one of Egypt's most successful pharaohs. And she did so at a time when women were often relegated to the background in politics. But Hatshepsut didn't just rule in name. She commanded armies, built monuments, and orchestrated grand trade expeditions that expanded Egypt's influence. Another famous figure in this realm is Cleopatra, one of the most famous pharaohs in history. While her reign was much later than Hatshepsut's, Cleopatra's role as a woman who ruled Egypt with such authority and cunning cannot be understated. She was not just the lover of Julius Caesar or Mark Antony. She was a strategic mastermind who navigated the treacherous political landscape of the ancient world with unmatched skill. But it wasn't always glamorous. Behind the scenes, the pharaohs' marriages were often political alliances, designed to solidify power rather than foster love. The pharaohs married women from noble families to strengthen their rule, but it wasn't unusual for the pharaohs to marry their own sisters or half-sisters in order to keep the royal bloodline pure. It was a strategy that might seem strange to us today, but for the Egyptians, it was all about maintaining divine purity and ensuring that the royal family remained in direct line with the gods. And let's not forget the other powerful women who weren't queens by title but still held immense sway in the royal court. These women could be high-ranking priestesses, daughters of powerful families, or even royal concubines who wielded influence behind closed doors. It was a time when women could rise to unexpected power, and often their roles were just as crucial as that of the pharaohs themselves. Historians continue to debate how much power these women actually held in comparison to their male counterparts, but one thing is certain. Without the influence of the women in the pharaohs' lives, the course of Egypt's history would have been vastly different. Now that we've explored the fascinating world of the women behind the throne, let's turn our attention to something that's equally mysterious: the curse of the pharaohs. This chilling legend has haunted archaeologists, historians, and explorers for centuries, and it all centers around the idea that the pharaohs' tombs, particularly the ones in the Valley of the Kings, were cursed. But how did a belief in ancient curses impact those who dared to disturb the pharaohs' final resting places? Historians still argue whether the curse of the pharaohs was just superstition, a tale spun by the media, or whether there might be something more to it. The first major incident that sparked the modern belief in the curse happened in 1922, when British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb of King Tutankhamun. Soon after, several members of the team involved in the discovery began to die under mysterious circumstances. Lord Carnarvon, who funded the excavation, died from an infected mosquito bite just a few months after the tomb was opened. Other members of the team, including those involved in the excavation of the tomb, followed soon after, fueling the belief that the tomb was cursed. But it wasn't just the deaths of those involved in the discovery that added fuel to the fire. The media quickly latched onto the idea of the curse, turning it into an international sensation. Newspapers across the world published stories about the curse, reporting strange occurrences and mysterious accidents involving people connected to the tomb. Soon, the curse of the Pharaohs became more than just a story, it was a phenomenon, one that captured the imaginations of people everywhere. However, historians point out that the deaths of those involved in the excavation could likely be explained by natural causes, disease, accidents, and the fact that many of those involved were elderly or in poor health. But despite this, the myth of the curse has endured. People continue to visit King Tut's tomb, but many still feel a sense of unease when they do, as if they're stepping into a place that's not just an ancient burial site, but a place filled with supernatural forces beyond their comprehension. Beyond the legend of the curse itself, there's also the darker side of tomb robbing. Pharaohs were buried with riches beyond imagination, gold, jewels, statues, and more. But these treasures were not just intended to accompany them into the afterlife. They were also symbols of their power and wealth. The tombs, unfortunately, attracted thieves who sought to make their own fortunes by plundering the pharaoh's final resting places. It's said that these thieves would often face a swift and brutal end, adding another layer of fear to the idea that disturbing the pharaoh's tombs would result in dire consequences. Whether or not the curse of the pharaohs is real, the stories surrounding it continue to fascinate and terrify us. Perhaps it's the combination of ancient mystery, superstition, and the power of the pharaohs themselves that keeps this tale alive in our collective consciousness. Now that we've explored the eerie legend of the curse of the pharaohs, let's shift gears and look at a rather fascinating aspect of pharaoh life: their sense of fashion. You might imagine pharaohs draped in gold, adorned with ornate jewelry and wearing extravagant robes, and you'd be absolutely right. But what you may not know is just how deeply their wardrobe choices reflected their divine status and how fashion played a pivotal role in reinforcing their godly image. Historians still argue whether the pharaohs' fashion was purely symbolic, designed to communicate their divine power, or if it was simply a luxury they indulged in. Either way, the pharaohs' clothing was a carefully curated message to the people, an unspoken reminder that they were not just rulers but living gods. They wore elaborate headdresses, often topped with the iconic cobra or vulture symbols, representing their power over both Upper and Lower Egypt. These symbols weren't just for show, they were deeply connected to the mythology of Egypt, indicating the pharaoh's role as both the earthly and divine protector of the land. Imagine seeing a pharaoh enter a room, draped in linens, their head adorned with a majestic crown, and jewelry sparkling from every inch of their body. From necklaces made of beads and precious stones to large, statement rings, the pharaoh's attire was meant to signal their power to the people, instilling both awe and fear. The colors of the clothing were symbolic too. Bright colors like red, blue, and gold were reserved for the most important members of society, the pharaoh included. These vibrant hues were meant to mirror the sun and the heavens, linking the pharaoh's earthly appearance to their celestial connection. But clothing wasn't just about appearances. The materials used were also significant. Linen, for example, was the primary fabric of choice for the pharaoh's garments, and it was considered not just luxurious, but a practical choice for the hot Egyptian climate. In fact, the wealth of a pharaoh could often be determined by the quality of their linen. Higher quality linen meant greater wealth, and the pharaohs wore only the finest. Interestingly, the fashion of pharaohs was not only about their clothes but also the accessories they chose to wear. Pharaohs were often seen wearing elaborate jewelry, including bracelets, anklets, and earrings. These pieces were made of gold, precious stones, and even faience, a type of ancient Egyptian glazed ceramic. But jewelry wasn't just decorative, it also had protective qualities. Many pieces were believed to ward off evil spirits, adding another layer of spiritual significance to the pharaoh's attire. However, not all pharaohs adhered strictly to the fashion of their predecessors. Take, for example, the famous pharaoh Akhenaten. who shocked the world by abandoning traditional royal imagery. Instead of the usual rigid, formal representations of pharaohs, Akhenaten and his family were depicted in more natural, and even somewhat androgynous, poses. Historians still debate why Akhenaten chose this unorthodox style. Some believe it was an attempt to break away from the rigid traditions of his predecessors, while others speculate that it had deeper religious or personal significance. Fashion, it seems, wasn't just about looking good, it was about power, symbolism, and the divine right of rule. Whether through crowns, jewelry, or robes, every aspect of a pharaoh's wardrobe had meaning. They weren't just kings and queens in their clothes, they were gods, and their attire helped remind their people of that fact. As we continue exploring the opulent and divine life of the pharaohs, let's take a step into one of their more unusual domains: food. The pharaohs were not just rulers of Egypt, they were also masters of an extravagant culinary world. Think of the finest delicacies, rare spices, and unusual ingredients, all carefully prepared to satisfy their godly appetites. The food they ate wasn't just about sustenance, it was another aspect of their divine status. If there's one thing the pharaohs knew how to do, it was turn even their meals into a display of power. Historians still debate the extent to which food played a role in reinforcing the pharaoh's divine status. While much of the pharaoh's daily life was ceremonial, food was a central aspect of their rituals. Their meals were highly curated, featuring the finest foods available, and often served in elaborate feasts that showcased Egypt's wealth. The pharaoh didn't just eat to live, they ate to remind the people of their connection to the gods. Imagine the scene: a grand feast in the pharaoh's court, with a variety of foods laid out in such abundance that it would make even the most elaborate modern buffet look modest. There would be roasted meats, like lamb and beef, served with bread and vegetables, some of the finest cuts reserved only for the pharaoh's table. And it wasn't just about the quality of the meat, it was about the way it was prepared. The Egyptians were known for their unique ways of cooking, often using a combination of roasting, baking, and boiling to prepare their food, all while infusing spices and sauces that were foreign to most people of the time. But the pharaoh's diet wasn't just about luxury, it was also about ritual. The pharaoh would often partake in religious ceremonies before a meal, offering food to the gods to ensure prosperity for Egypt. This connection between food and the divine wasn't just symbolic. It was believed that consuming these offerings would ensure the pharaoh's continued strength and favor with the gods. Their feasts were not just opportunities for indulgence but also for reinforcing their sacred role as a mediator between the gods and the people. Yet, the culinary life of the pharaohs wasn't without its quirks. The royal court had access to a variety of strange and exotic foods, some of which might make modern palates cringe. Among the more bizarre dishes were delicacies like fermented fish, a pungent and acquired taste, and crocodile meat, a rarity that symbolized the pharaoh's control over Egypt's natural resources. The pharaohs also had a taste for exotic fruits, some of which were imported from distant lands along the Nile or traded from places far beyond Egypt's borders. Historians have uncovered evidence that pharaohs enjoyed an abundance of bread and beer too. But these were no simple staples. They were often prepared with care, with the bread sometimes made from the finest grain, and the beer brewed in large quantities, often flavored with various herbs. The beer was typically a thick, porridge-like consistency, far from the drink we're accustomed to today. Then there's the delicacy of honey, which was used not just in food, but also for medicinal purposes. Pharaohs would indulge in honey-sweetened pastries, cakes, and even syrups, all carefully prepared by their royal kitchens. This sweet treat was more than just a dessert, it was considered a gift from the gods, used in religious ceremonies and personal offerings. But of course, the pharaoh's food choices didn't always come without risks. The Egyptians were not immune to the dangers of spoiled or contaminated food. With no refrigeration and limited preservation methods, it's likely that pharaohs sometimes ate food that was less than ideal, and they were at constant risk of foodborne illness. However, the emphasis on magical protection extended to their food as well. Many meals would be prepared with herbs and spices thought to have protective properties, ensuring that the pharaoh's body and their royal health remained intact. Whether it was a grand feast or a simple meal, food for the pharaohs was never just about filling the stomach. It was an act of power, a symbol of their divine nature, and a key part of their ability to maintain control over Egypt. Now that we've dined with the pharaohs, let's take a detour into another fascinating part of their lives: the animals they kept as pets and the sacred creatures they revered. The pharaohs didn't just rule over humans, they also held dominion over the animals of Egypt, many of which were considered sacred or even divine. Their connection to these creatures went beyond the practical. These animals often served as symbols of power, protection, and sometimes the pharaoh's direct link to the gods. Historians still argue whether the pharaohs truly believed that their animals had supernatural powers, or if the relationship was symbolic, a way to project even more grandeur and divinity. But one thing is clear: animals played a significant role in reinforcing the pharaoh's divine status. Some of the most famous of these royal pets included lions, cheetahs, and even crocodiles, all of which had symbolic meaning in Egyptian culture. Imagine the scene: a pharaoh strolling through their palace gardens with a leopard by their side, its sleek fur a sign of the pharaoh's control over the wild. Or picture the pharaoh watching a trained lion perform tricks in front of their court, a display of both wealth and power. Lions were considered regal and ferocious creatures, and they were often associated with the sun god Ra, symbolizing strength and leadership. To have a lion as a pet was to show that the pharaoh could tame the wildest beasts, thus reinforcing their role as a ruler with divine power. Crocodiles, however, were a more unusual, and rather terrifying, symbol of the pharaoh's authority. The crocodile was associated with the god Sobuk, who was believed to be a protector and a symbol of fertility and power. Pharaohs would often keep crocodiles in royal zoos or even as pets, using them as symbols of their ability to control the forces of nature. These animals weren't just ornamental, they were deeply embedded in the pharaoh's religious practices, often appearing in religious rituals and offerings. But the pharaohs didn't only keep dangerous, fearsome creatures as pets. Many of them had cats, which were revered as sacred animals in ancient Egypt. Cats were considered protectors, guarding the pharaoh's home from evil spirits and vermin. Cats were also connected to the goddess Batet, who was the goddess of home, fertility, and protection. The pharaoh's love of cats wasn't just about companionship, it was about invoking the goddess's protective powers. Interestingly, the pharaohs were so fond of their cats that they went to great lengths to ensure their comfort and safety. Cats were often kept in the royal household, where they were pampered with food, comfortable sleeping spaces, and even jewelry. The pharaohs had special laws regarding the protection of cats, and the killing of a cat, even by accident, was considered a serious crime. In fact, ancient Egyptian law held that the punishment for killing a cat could be as severe as death. Beyond cats, pharaohs also had other exotic pets like monkeys and birds. These animals were often kept for their beauty, their ability to perform tricks, or simply as signs of the pharaoh's wealth. They were displayed at royal feasts and public events, adding to the spectacle of the pharaoh's reign. Monkeys in particular were symbols of fun and fertility, and they were often seen in the company of the royal family. But despite the love and reverence for these animals, there was a darker side to the pharaoh's relationships with their pets. Some animals, particularly lions and crocodiles, were used in gladiatorial-style shows where they would fight each other or fight humans for the entertainment of the royal court. These displays were a reminder of the pharaoh's control over nature, but they were also a demonstration of their ability to command life and death. So, while the pharaohs were undoubtedly the rulers of the human world, their dominion extended far beyond their court, into the realm of animals. They saw themselves as powerful figures, connected to both the divine and the natural world, and their relationships with animals reflected this connection. As we continue to uncover the mysteries of the pharaohs, let's dive into a subject that may seem a bit strange at first: magic. Ancient Egypt was a land steeped in mysticism, and for the pharaohs, magic was not just a belief, but a practical tool of governance. They didn't rely on magic to entertain themselves, it was a force that they truly believed could influence their lives, ensure their reign, and protect them from threats both earthly and divine. Pharaohs were seen as the bridge between the gods and the people, and magic played a central role in cementing that position. Historians still argue whether the pharaohs used magic out of genuine belief or as a form of political maneuvering, meant to reinforce their divine power. But the fact remains that magic was a deeply ingrained part of Egyptian life, especially for the rulers. Magic in ancient Egypt was a highly structured, formal practice, intertwined with religion, politics, and even medicine. In fact, priests of the pharaohs were often trained in magical arts, learning spells and rituals that could protect the pharaoh, enhance their power, or curse their enemies. One of the most famous magical practices associated with the pharaohs was the use of amulets. These small objects, often crafted from precious stones or metals, were believed to offer protection from evil spirits and bring good fortune. Pharaohs, as well as common Egyptians, would wear amulets as a form of magical armor, safeguarding their bodies and souls. The most common amulets were inscribed with symbols of the gods, and many pharaohs would wear them in public, as both a personal protection and a sign of their divine status. But amulets weren't the only magical tools the pharaohs relied on. Spells and incantations were also integral parts of royal life. The pharaohs would often commission priests to perform elaborate rituals, calling upon the gods for blessings or protection. These spells could be used for everything from ensuring a bountiful harvest to guaranteeing victory in battle. Magic, in this sense, wasn't just about personal power, it was about maintaining Egypt's position in the world. The pharaohs needed the favor of the gods to keep their land prosperous and their rule unchallenged. One fascinating aspect of Egyptian magic was the Book of the Dead, an ancient text filled with spells and instructions for navigating the afterlife. This book was used by the pharaohs to ensure their safe journey into the next world. The idea was that the soul of the pharaoh would face many trials and dangers in the afterlife, and the spells within the Book of the Dead would protect them from harm. For the pharaohs, it wasn't just about surviving death, it was about mastering it, ensuring they would be reborn in the next world with the same power they held in the mortal one. But magic wasn't always used for protection, it was also used as a weapon. Pharaohs would sometimes curse their enemies with powerful spells, ensuring their downfall. These curses were often inscribed on tombs or statues, warning future tomb robbers that they would face divine retribution if they dared disturb the pharaoh's resting place. The belief in these curses was so strong that many tomb robbers would be found dead shortly after raiding a pharaoh's tomb, fueling the myth of the curse of the pharaohs. Whether the curses were real or simply a result of bad luck, they were part of the pharaoh's psychological warfare. The use of magic also extended to medicine. Ancient Egyptians believed that the body and soul were interconnected, and a pharaoh's health was seen as directly linked to their divine status. If a pharaoh fell ill, it wasn't just a matter of medicine, it was a sign that their divine power was waning. Priests and magicians would be called upon to perform rituals to restore the pharaoh's strength, using magical spells alongside physical treatments. For the pharaohs, their health was not just a personal matter, it was tied to the health of the entire nation. Magic was so deeply woven into the fabric of Egyptian culture that it permeated every level of society, but for the pharaohs, it was a vital tool for maintaining control over both their mortal and divine worlds. Whether it was using amulets, spells, or curses, magic was just another way for the pharaohs to reinforce their supreme status as gods on earth. And while much of it was rooted in belief, it also served a very real political purpose: to keep the pharaohs in power, invincible, and immortal. We've delved into magic, but now let's shift our focus to something even more peculiar and unsettling: the death rituals of the pharaohs. In ancient Egypt, death was not seen as an end but as a transition to another world, a passage that had to be meticulously planned and executed. The pharaohs, being divine figures, required elaborate rituals to ensure their safe journey into the afterlife, a journey that would guarantee their immortality and continued reign from beyond the grave. Historians still argue whether these death rituals were a manifestation of genuine belief in the afterlife or if they were simply political tools to reinforce the pharaoh's divine rule. Either way, the rites performed when a pharaoh passed were elaborate, terrifying, and designed to protect the pharaoh's soul as it journeyed through the underworld. Death was not just an event, it was a performance, one that ensured the pharaoh's place in eternity. When a pharaoh died, the first step was the mummification process, which was no mere embalming. The body of the pharaoh had to be preserved in the most sacred way possible, ensuring that it would remain intact for the afterlife. This process was incredibly detailed, involving the removal of internal organs which were preserved in canopic jars, and the use of oils and resins to protect the body from decay. The heart, often believed to be the seat of the soul, was typically left inside the body to ensure that the pharaoh could be judged in the afterlife. Every detail of the mummification was symbolic, representing the pharaoh's connection to the gods and the eternal nature of their soul. Once the body was mummified, the pharaoh's tomb was prepared. But it wasn't just any tomb, it was a spiritual fortress. Tombs were filled with treasures, statues, furniture, and food to ensure the pharaoh's comfort in the afterlife. The tomb also had intricate hieroglyphic inscriptions, which were not just decorative. They were magical spells designed to guide the pharaoh safely through the dangers of the afterlife. These spells were meant to protect the pharaoh from demons, monsters, and other supernatural threats that would attempt to prevent their soul from reaching the gods. The tomb was an entire world in itself, meant to mimic the pharaoh's earthly palace and ensure their continued reign over Egypt, even in death. But the death rituals didn't stop at the tomb. The pharaoh's funeral procession was a grand spectacle, with an entourage of mourners, priests, and attendants accompanying the body to its final resting place. The procession would be accompanied by prayers, songs, and sacrifices to honor the pharaoh and invoke the favor of the gods. The royal court, soldiers, and even animals were often part of these funerals, adding an eerie, ritualistic nature to the entire affair. The pharaoh's body would be transported in a sarcophagus, often intricately designed and sometimes weighing thousands of pounds, to its final destination, surrounded by the reverence of their people. What makes the pharaoh's death rituals particularly disturbing is the human sacrifice that sometimes accompanied their burial. It was believed that the pharaoh's soul needed servants to accompany them to the afterlife, and so, in some cases, slaves or soldiers were buried alive with the pharaoh, often in elaborate, ceremonial rites. The idea was that these people would continue to serve the pharaoh in the afterlife, ensuring that they weren't alone on their journey. Though this practice was rare and became less common over time, it highlights the lengths to which the ancient Egyptians would go to secure the pharaoh's passage into eternity. However, not all death rituals were as brutal. For many pharaohs, there were elaborate funerary feasts that would take place after the burial. These feasts were held to celebrate the pharaoh's life and ensure that their spirit would be nourished in the afterlife. These banquets were often attended by the elite of society and included foods, music, and entertainment meant to honor the deceased ruler. The death of a pharaoh was a significant event, not just for their family but for the entire nation. Their passing marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. But even in death, the pharaoh's influence lingered, thanks to the rituals that surrounded their passing. The elaborate mummification, the grand funerals, and the burial in monumental tombs ensured that the pharaoh's legacy would never truly fade. They weren't just buried, they were immortalized as their soul continued to reign over Egypt from the afterlife. As we reflect on the fascinating and eerie world of the pharaoh's death rituals, let's now explore one of the most iconic symbols of their reign, the pyramids. These colossal structures, which still stand as a testament to ancient Egypt's grandeur, were not only tombs for the pharaohs but also symbols of their divine power and immortality. But constructing a pyramid was no simple task. It was a monumental feat of engineering, and behind it lay a deep, spiritual meaning, intertwined with the pharaohs' belief in their own eternal rule. Historians still debate how exactly the pyramids were built, and theories abound regarding the methods used to transport and position the massive stone blocks. Some believe that a series of ramps were used to move the stones, while others argue that the workers had a more sophisticated method at their disposal. Regardless of the method, there's no denying the sheer scale of the endeavor. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, originally stood at 481 feet tall and was made up of over 2 million limestone blocks, some of which weighed several tons each. To put it simply, it was an engineering marvel that would be difficult to replicate even today. But the pyramids weren't just engineering achievements, they were also deeply spiritual. The Egyptians believed that the pyramid's shape was a physical representation of the Benben stone, the primordial mound from which creation began. This symbolic connection to creation and the gods was central to the pharaoh's belief that their tomb, their final resting place, would be a vessel that would transport them to the afterlife. The pyramid was seen as a way to help the pharaoh ascend to the heavens, ensuring that their soul would join the gods and continue to rule Egypt from above. The pyramid itself was designed with intricate astronomical alignment to ensure that it was perfectly oriented with the stars, particularly the star Sirius, which was associated with the goddess Isis. The alignment was meant to guide the pharaoh's soul toward the heavens, linking their earthly reign with the divine. In fact, many of the pyramids were not just tombs, they were also temples, places where rituals and ceremonies could be performed to honor the pharaoh both in life and death. Building these enormous monuments required a vast workforce, including skilled laborers, artisans, and priests. Contrary to popular belief, the workers who built the pyramids were not slaves but rather paid laborers who worked on the project as part of their duty to the pharaoh. These workers were highly skilled and performed their tasks with precision, understanding that the pyramid they were building wasn't just a tomb, it was a sacred project, one that would ensure the pharaoh's immortality. Their efforts were part of a larger religious and cultural movement that saw construction not as manual labor, but as a form of worship. The construction of a pyramid also represented the pharaoh's absolute control over the land and its resources. The entire country was mobilized for the task, and the pharaoh had access to the finest materials and most skilled workers. It wasn't just about wealth, it was about showcasing the pharaoh's power to unite the nation for a singular, monumental purpose. The pyramid, therefore, was more than just a tomb. It was a symbol of the pharaoh's divine authority, their ability to transcend death, and their everlasting connection to the gods. But despite the splendor of the pyramids, the construction process wasn't without its difficulties. The workers faced grueling conditions, including intense heat, long hours, and the constant danger of injury or death. Yet, the workers believed that their labor was part of a greater purpose, and many were likely honored to contribute to such a monumental task. After all, they were helping to create a structure that would endure for millennia, a structure that would stand as a monument to the pharaoh's divinity and power. Even today, the pyramids remain an enduring mystery. How did the Egyptians manage to construct such massive structures with such primitive tools? What secrets do the pyramids hold? And perhaps most hauntingly, what do these giant tombs say about the pharaoh's desire for eternal life and their belief in the afterlife? The pyramids remain a testament to the pharaoh's boundless ambition, their devotion to their gods, and their belief in the power of the afterlife. They were more than just tombs. They were the pharaoh's way of ensuring that their reign would never truly end. Now that we've explored the grandeur of the pyramids, let's look into a more intimate, yet equally fascinating part of the pharaoh's life: their wives and the complicated web of relationships within the royal family. The pharaoh's marriages weren't just about love or companionship. They were deeply political, carefully crafted alliances that were meant to secure power and maintain the purity of the royal bloodline. But within this web of politics, power, and intrigue, there were real human emotions, conflicts, and struggles that shaped the course of Egypt's history. Historians still argue about the exact nature of the pharaoh's marriages. Were they purely political unions, or were there genuine romantic relationships at play? One thing that is clear is that the pharaohs didn't just marry for love. Their marriages were strategic, designed to reinforce their claim to the throne and secure their dynasty's future. Pharaohs often married their sisters or half-sisters to maintain the purity of their royal bloodline. This practice might seem strange, even disturbing to us today, but to the Egyptians, it was a way of keeping the divine bloodline intact. The pharaohs saw themselves as gods, and their marriages were a reflection of that divine status. Perhaps the most famous example of this is the relationship between Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Akhenaten, one of Egypt's most controversial pharaohs, shocked the world by abandoning traditional religious practices and worshipping a single god, Aten. His marriage to Nefertiti, a powerful and enigmatic queen, was not just a romantic union. It was a partnership that represented a significant shift in Egypt's religious and political landscape. Some scholars even speculate that Nefertiti may have ruled as a pharaoh after Akhenaten's death, although the details remain a mystery. However, the pharaohs didn't always have just one wife. While some pharaohs, like Akhenaten, had a single queen, others had multiple wives and concubines, each with different levels of power and influence. These marriages and relationships were often about alliances with powerful families, securing loyalty, and ensuring that the pharaoh's rule remained uncontested. Many of the pharaoh's wives came from noble or royal families, and they often played a crucial role in maintaining the pharaoh's power. Take Ramesses II, for example, one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, who is believed to have had over 200 wives and concubines. His favorite wife, Nefertari, was not only his queen but also his trusted confidant and advisor. Their marriage was a symbol of both love and power, and it was one of the few royal marriages that seemed to transcend the purely political. Nefertari was so highly regarded that her tomb, located in the Valley of the Queens, is one of the most beautiful and elaborate tombs ever discovered. She wasn't just a consort, she was a powerful figure in her own right, helping to steer the course of Egypt's destiny during Ramesses II's reign. But not all marriages were as harmonious. The relationships within the royal family could be fraught with tension and competition. When a pharaoh had multiple wives, each one was vying for influence and power, and the offspring of these unions often competed for the throne. The sons of the pharaohs were expected to follow in their father's footsteps, but only one could inherit the throne. This led to intense rivalries and, at times, bloody conflicts. Some pharaohs had to fight to maintain their hold on power, even against members of their own family. The role of women in the pharaohs' lives was also more than just ceremonial. Many of these queens and consorts played vital roles in politics, religion, and military affairs. They were often seen as co-regents, sharing power with the pharaoh and sometimes even ruling in their own right. Women like Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, became symbols of Egypt's power and prestige. Cleopatra was known not only for her beauty but also for her intellect, political savvy, and ability to wield power. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were as much about strengthening Egypt's position in the world as they were about love and romance. Cleopatra's reign marked the end of the pharaohs, but her legacy continues to captivate the world. In the royal harem, however, there was always a sense of tension. Though the pharaoh might have many wives, only one could be the great royal wife, the highest-ranking woman in the royal court. This title was not just an honor, it came with significant political power, as the great royal wife often had a say in decisions of state and was involved in religious ceremonies that reinforced the pharaoh's divine status. The title of great royal wife was usually passed down to the pharaoh's first and most beloved wife, though it wasn't always the case. The complexity of the pharaoh's marriages reveals a lot about their world. It was a world where love and politics were often inseparable, where the pursuit of power was just as important as the pursuit of happiness. In this high-stakes game of thrones, every marriage, every alliance, and every royal child had the potential to change the course of Egypt's history. As we move from the complex web of royal marriages, let's explore a more subtle, yet equally significant, aspect of the pharaohs' lives: their legacy. The pharaohs, despite their immense power and wealth, were acutely aware of the impermanence of life. To them, leaving behind a lasting legacy wasn't just a personal desire, it was a divine responsibility. Their reigns were seen as extensions of the God's will, and thus, their legacies had to be immortalized in ways that would allow their influence to persist long after death. Historians still debate just how much the pharaohs believed in the permanence of their legacies, especially considering the common practice of erasing history when a pharaoh's reign ended. Some pharaohs, particularly those who were overthrown or forgotten by their successors, faced their names being obliterated from history, literally chiseled off monuments, statues, and tombs. It was a cruel reminder that in the world of ancient Egypt, a ruler's immortality was never guaranteed. Yet, despite these attempts at erasure, many pharaohs succeeded in creating legacies that have endured through millennia. One of the primary ways the pharaohs sought to immortalize their names was through monumental architecture. We've already explored the vast pyramids, but the pharaohs also commissioned temples, statues, and obelisks to honor their own divine nature. These structures were not just symbols of their power, they were meant to endure for eternity. The towering obelisks, which were often inscribed with the pharaoh's accomplishments and praises, were designed to reflect the eternal nature of the gods themselves. Their pointed tips, reaching toward the sky, symbolized the pharaoh's connection to the divine and the pharaoh's desire to remain a part of the cosmos forever. However, not all pharaohs had the luxury of monumental tombs or grand structures. For some, their legacy was built through more subtle methods, such as their art, literature, or political achievements. Pharaohs like Thutmose III expanded Egypt's borders through military conquests, ensuring that their name would be remembered for their military prowess. Similarly, Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great, built an extensive system of temples, monuments, and statues, many of which still stand today. He also made a remarkable impact on Egyptian art, as his reign saw the creation of iconic imagery that defined Egypt's visual culture for centuries. But beyond the physical monuments and the military conquests, the pharaohs were also keenly aware of the need to create dynastic continuity. It wasn't enough for a pharaoh to leave behind a legacy in stone. They had to ensure that their descendants would continue to rule Egypt, maintaining the divine bloodline for generations. This is where the role of their children came into play. The pharaoh's sons and daughters were seen as part of the ongoing divine plan, and their presence in the royal court reinforced the idea that Egypt's rulers were eternal. For many pharaohs, ensuring that their offspring succeeded them was a central focus of their reign. Despite their grand plans for immortality, many pharaohs still faced challenges in passing on their legacy. Some were succeeded by weak heirs or no heirs at all, leading to periods of instability and even the collapse of certain dynasties. In cases where pharaohs had no sons, the throne often passed to a daughter or a relative, complicating the smooth continuation of the royal lineage. Tutankhamun, for instance, was an unexpected heir who became pharaoh at a young age and died early, leaving Egypt in the hands of his successors, who were tasked with carrying his legacy forward, even though his reign was short-lived and relatively uneventful. Yet, despite these challenges, the pharaohs had a remarkable ability to ensure their names lived on, even when their dynasties were forgotten. The discovery of tombs, especially that of Tutankhamun, allowed the modern world to glimpse into the rich, complicated lives of the pharaohs and solidified their place in history. Thanks to the work of archaeologists, we now know more about these ancient rulers than ever before, ensuring that their legacy has endured into the modern day. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of the pharaohs is not the grand temples or monuments, but the cultural influence they left behind. From their contributions to art, literature, architecture, and religion, the pharaohs shaped the development of Egyptian civilization and, by extension, the wider world. Their influence can be seen in the writings of ancient historians, in the artistic works that still inspire modern artists, and in the architecture of ancient monuments that continue to captivate us. Their legacies remind us that while the pharaohs may have passed from this world, their power and influence remain, etched in the stones of the pyramids, reflected in the walls of temples, and carried through the stories of their reigns. The pharaohs, in their pursuit of immortality, succeeded not only in creating a lasting presence in Egypt but also in the hearts and minds of the people who would come long after they were gone. Now that we've reflected on the pharaohs' legacies, it's time to turn our gaze toward the end of their reigns. The pharaohs, despite their immense power and godlike status, were not immune to the passage of time. The ancient world was ever-changing, and the pharaohs' once unquestioned dominance eventually came to an end. So, how did the mighty pharaohs who ruled for centuries fall? What brought about the end of Egypt's once glorious dynasty? Historians still argue over the exact reasons for the fall of the pharaohs, and there is no single explanation for their decline. But one thing is clear: as time went on, Egypt's political, social, and military systems became increasingly vulnerable. The world around Egypt was shifting, and the once mighty empire found itself caught between rising powers, internal strife, and weakening leadership. For all their divine status and monumental achievements, the pharaohs couldn't escape the forces of history. One of the major factors contributing to the downfall of the pharaohs was the invasion of foreign powers. Egypt, which had long enjoyed a position of dominance in the ancient world, was slowly overtaken by outside forces. The Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans all made their marks on Egypt, and eventually, these foreign invaders began to strip away the pharaoh's power. By the time of Alexander the Great's invasion in 332 BCE, the once great Egyptian dynasty was already in decline. However, it wasn't just the foreign invaders that caused the pharaoh's downfall, it was also internal conflicts. Egypt, over the centuries, had experienced periods of instability, where rival factions fought for control of the throne. The civil wars and struggles for succession weakened the kingdom and left it vulnerable to outside threats. Even though the pharaohs had been divine figures, their power was not absolute, and the struggle for control within the royal family, as well as the increasingly strained relationship between the pharaohs and their people, led to social unrest. But perhaps the most profound factor in the pharaohs' demise was their gradual loss of divine authority. As Egypt became more exposed to foreign influences, and as new religious and political ideas began to take root, the once unshakable belief in the pharaoh's divinity began to wane. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great's conquest, introduced Greek customs, values, and philosophies that gradually displaced the ancient Egyptian worldview. The rise of Hellenistic influence began to undermine the pharaoh's hold on Egypt, as Greek and Roman gods and philosophies started to take precedence over the old Egyptian beliefs. The final blow to the pharaohs came with the rise of Rome. Under Emperor Augustus, Egypt was absorbed into the Roman Empire in 30 BCE, and Cleopatra VII, the last of the pharaohs, tragically ended her life in the wake of her defeat by Rome. The fall of Egypt's native monarchy marked the end of an era, and Egypt was never again ruled by its indigenous pharaohs. Despite the fall of the pharaohs and the eventual absorption of Egypt into the Roman Empire, their legacy lived on. Egypt continued to be a hub of culture and knowledge, attracting scholars and thinkers from across the ancient world. The pyramids, temples, and monuments built by the pharaohs remain standing, serving as reminders of Egypt's former glory. The fascination with the pharaohs only grew over time, as their mysteries, their divine status, and their monumental achievements continued to captivate the imagination of later generations. In many ways, the decline of the pharaohs didn't mark the end of their influence. It marked the beginning of their transformation into legends. Today, the pharaohs are remembered not just for their dynastic rule, but for their contributions to art, architecture, religion, and governance. They left behind a culture that still resonates with us, influencing everything from modern architecture to popular culture, and their image remains one of the most iconic in history. The fall of the pharaohs was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual unraveling of a system that had once been the center of the ancient world. However, even in their decline, the pharaohs' mark on history remained indelible. They may have lost their crowns, but their legacy endured, transcending time and continuing to inspire awe and curiosity to this day. As we near the end of our journey through the mysterious lives of the pharaohs, let's take a step back and reflect on their lasting impact on the world. Despite the fall of Egypt's native monarchy, the story of the pharaohs did not fade into obscurity. The ancient Egyptians, with their divine rulers and monumental achievements, continue to captivate the world today. Their influence on art, architecture, religion, and governance remains profound, and their legacy lives on, not just through the pyramids and temples they left behind, but in the way we perceive power, divinity, and the eternal quest for immortality. Historians still argue about how to fully understand the reign of the pharaohs, especially when it comes to their divine status. Were they truly gods, as the ancient Egyptians believed, or were they simply rulers who wielded absolute power over their people? The answer is likely a mixture of both. The pharaohs were, in many ways, both mortal and divine. People who were seen as gods on earth but who also had to grapple with the challenges and realities of ruling an empire. Their ability to project divinity through their actions, their architecture, and their relationships with their people allowed them to maintain their status as the highest of authorities. As we look at the monumental structures left behind by the pharaohs, the pyramids, the temples, the statues, we are reminded of the ambition that drove them. The pharaohs didn't just want to rule Egypt. They wanted to be remembered for eternity, and they achieved that goal. The sheer scale of their monuments, the intricacy of their tombs, and the opulence of their reigns were all designed with one thing in mind: immortality. And in that regard they succeeded. The pyramids, still standing after thousands of years, remain the most iconic symbol of their enduring legacy. In the modern world, the fascination with the pharaohs shows no sign of fading. From movies and documentaries to academic research and tourism, the pharaohs continue to be a source of inspiration and wonder. The ancient Egyptians left us with not just physical monuments, but a rich cultural heritage that still informs our understanding of art, science, and history. Their contributions to the development of writing, mathematics, and engineering are still felt today. The Rosetta Stone, for example, unlocked the mysteries of the Egyptian language and opened the door to understanding one of the oldest and most complex civilizations in human history. The pharaohs, in their pursuit of immortality, created something much more lasting than their own lives. They created a culture that continues to shape our world. Whether through the grand temples that line the banks of the Nile, the intricate hieroglyphs carved into stone, or the myths and legends that still captivate us, the pharaohs left an indelible mark on human civilization. Their lives and deaths, their triumphs and struggles, continue to intrigue us, and in many ways they will never truly be gone. So as we close tonight's journey through the lives of the pharaohs, let's remember that they are not just figures of the past. They are part of a living legacy, one that continues to shape our understanding of power, divinity, and the eternal quest for meaning in a world that is ultimately always changing. The pharaoh's story may have ended long ago, but their impact lives on, just as their monumental structures continue to stand as testaments to their ambition, their genius, and their belief in the power of immortality. Now, as we prepare to drift into sleep, let their story linger in your thoughts, their grandeur, their mysteries, and their place in the tapestry of human history. The pharaohs are no longer with us, but their influence continues to endure, stretching across millennia.